Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. Time for another show. Time for all sorts of activity at KITM House or World Headquarters, depending on how you view it. I like the idea of just calling it KITM House now. Like, we're an outpost on campus. We're observing all of the protests that are going on. From on the ground, we're doing original reporting. We're not, of course. But I like the idea. Briefly. But, of course, if I want to revert to KITM World Headquarters, that's fine, too, because that is also in my house, and it's really not a problem. Okay, well, plenty going on, of course, as usual. Today, Tuesday, that means another day in court for the fascist guy. More, I guess, call for gas X, I suppose, inside of the courtroom. I don't know whether they put that in the vending machines yet or not. Maybe nose plugs would be more, you'd make greater sales, I guess, on that one. I suppose the gas X wouldn't move at all because he's moving it all the time and he doesn't care and is not interested in suppressing it. Okay, well, anyway, let's see. Yesterday's big news was the testimony of Michael Cohen, and plenty of coverage of that being offered to me all over the place in email. Everybody wants us to read their version of what happened and the analysis of what happened. I think we got a pretty good sense of what he was going to provide, but perhaps we'll grab a recap and see if we missed anything there. There's apparently there's news that Kamala Harris drops F-bombs every once in a while, and I guess that's okay with me. I'm fine. Is like big news, apparently. It's the only news you can get about Kamala Harris. She's running around the country speaking to every group under the sun, trying to hold the whole coalition together, trying to set up for the, that big election thing that we're having later on this year, doing all the work that she needs to be doing. And it's thankless work, but apparently then she said the F word at some point. And that's news. That's what she does. I mean, it made a lot of headlines, and maybe that's a good thing. I mean, maybe it was even calculated. I guess at the level of vice president, you have to assume that everything, at least there's a good 50% chance that things like that are calculated. But apparently speaking to who? A leadership summit of sorts for, is it Asian Americans? Yes. And to youngsters as well. So I guess that's what everybody's got, has got everybody up in arms, I suppose. Of course, I guess by this point, people complaining about it, and there really aren't that many. I don't see a whole lot of them, and they're not in my timeline. The people who are in my timeline, generally speaking, are saying, "Yeah, well, she had it right," and all that. But you must be thinking back to when Donald Trump addressed the Boy Scouts, the Eagle Scouts, or was it all Eagles, or were they younger? Or the Boy Scout Jamboree, so they might have even been younger. They're not the youngest Scouts, but still teenage Scouts, and of course spent his whole time talking about hookers and cocaine parties on people's yachts and whatever. But there you go. Harris utters a profanity, says AP, in advice to young Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And I saw some recap of that story on social media last night, that actually the headline was written in such a way as to suggest that she had somehow used a racial slur in speaking to this group, which I doubted very much was the case. It's now clarified. I don't know if AP was the offender in that one, but this seems much clearer, I think, in just a random profanity in some probably good advice to the group she was speaking to. Yeah, I was like, well, what would she have said? I can't imagine anything that she would have actually said in that situation, unless it was, and if it was somehow perceived as a slight against the people she was speaking to, it might have been, I hope all of you effing Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders are out there kicking ass every day. I mean, was that? No. But it was pretty close. I guess if you happen to have been one of the few people that missed the story, it was essentially, it says here, Harris gave a lengthy response to a question. Let's see, what's the question? She was asked what it means to be the first vice president of Asian descent, and how that heritage had informed her views and roles as a leader. Harris's mother was from India, her father from Jamaica, and she's the first woman elected vice president. So, let's not leave that out of it. Harris gave a lengthy response in which she told young people to keep their chins up when they go into spaces where no one else looks like them. And then she added, we have to know that sometimes people will open the door for you and leave it open. Sometimes they won't. And then, in those cases, I guess, you need to kick that effing door down, which is, generally speaking, good and inspirational advice. I have to imagine that the youth attending such a Asian American, Pacific Islander, Hawaiian Islander leadership summit, probably in their late teens, most likely, certainly mid to late teens. They've certainly seen worse, heard worse. Who knows where? Could have been everywhere. Hey, maybe in school, for all we know. After all the woke Antifa teachers are probably cursing at them left and right. Certainly wasn't anything they hadn't heard before. Certainly not shocking in this day and age. Donald Trump says it every 15 minutes, so I suppose we can get over it. I just wanted to note for the fact that if you were minding your own business somewhere one day and missed this story, and someone brought it up, now you will have been acculturated to it. Okay, so there we have it. I don't know. That's not like a super important story or anything. There's much more important stuff going on, as we said, in the courtroom and elsewhere. I actually have a suggestion at hand for a story that is, in fact, parked in pocket. Great reason to get it out of there. Christine on 16 suggests, in case we hadn't seen it, this story that has emerged over the weekend, reporting in the papers, but also reaction to it. I have both actually sitting in pockets. So we're thinking along the same lines here on this one. And let's see. Shall we read let's read the reaction shot first. This is the one that Christine actually sent over to me from J. Quo's Substack, under the title of, let's get the pop-ups out of the way. So that's why he hid his tax returns. Yeah, over the weekend, I was surprised to see the return to the headlines of Donald Trump's taxes, or more specifically his overarching scheme of tax evasion, and that there was an IRS investigation, an IRS audit, in fact, of his taxes, and that they had discovered that he was probably some $100 million in arrears to the IRS. And I just was surprised to see the word audit mentioned again. Just saying, is the audit almost over? Is he ready to release his taxes now? That the audit is almost done. But so I don't know. I feel like we've been over this ground. And I think Jay Quo notes, at one point, the New York Times years ago launched their big investigation into his tax evasion schemes. But I guess the IRS actually trying to nail it down and turn it into, well, is this a case that we should be making? Can we recoup this money? And New York Times and ProPublica teaming up, I think, on another round of articles about what the IRS is finding. We'll get to that one. But first, Jay Quo's reaction. We'll do it in reverse. So sometimes it's more fun that way. So that's why he hid his tax returns. Ah, yes. A new joint report by ProPublica and the New York Times fills in critical pieces of the Trump tax puzzle. We may find that Jay's coverage of it is all we really need here. The long mystery around Trump's tax returns may finally have been solved. I mean, I think we all solved it years ago, but I think he knows that too. When Trump ran for president in 2016, he broke with tradition. No, not that. And refused to release copies of his tax returns. He promised he would eventually release them, but that was a lie. Surprise, surprise. We never saw them before that election. But in September of 2020, the New York Times did report at length about them. including that Trump had actually paid zero or near zero in federal income taxes for many years. He had claimed huge carryover losses from his real estate ventures that wiped out whatever millions he had made from his TV series, The Apprentice, and from monetizing his brand. Now, it turns out a huge chunk of those losses that Trump had claimed were very likely bogus. Over the weekend, ProPublica and the New York Times jointly reported that an IRS inquiry found Trump used a, quote, dubious accounting maneuver, i.e. lying, to claim, they didn't say that, I do, but a dubious accounting maneuver to claim improper tax breaks from his troubled Chicago tower. If he ultimately loses his long battle with the IRS, he could owe the federal government north of $100 million plus interest and penalties. So, how did Trump pull off this bogus write-off? By lying and hoping he wouldn't be caught or pardoning himself if he were president, probably. The ProPublica Times joint report goes into great detail, but I'll try and explain this minus much of the financial and tax jargon. So maybe this is a better distillation of the whole thing, although, I don't know, financial and tax jargon can sometimes be fun. Anyway, here's what we got here. First subsection here, worthless property. That sounds like got Trump written all over it. At its core, the Trump tax scam comes down to basic arithmetic and common sense rule. You can't squeeze out more write-offs from something that's already worthless. When your business fails, you normally get to write off the value of your losses, including what you personally put into the business. At the point of failure, you can declare your business worthless and at least reduce your tax liability by how much you've lost. If your losses exceed your income that year, you can usually carry over the loss to subsequent years. Trump took full advantage of this worthless declaration. He took a huge bath, which you'd have to, really, honestly, otherwise you'd get stuck in the tub. He took a huge bath during the financial crisis of 2008 when he wasn't able to sell enough condos in his Chicago tower to cover the cost of construction. Over the 825 units planned, he had only sold 133 by that time, and costs were rising. He owed his lenders hundreds of millions, and after getting a 6-month extension, he wound up defaulting on his loans. Predictably, of course, now this is kind of very Trump, right? Predictably, that's what sets it up. Trump has flopped in his business and has defaulted on his loans. So what does he do? Predictably, Trump sued his lenders, apparently unsuccessfully, not surprising, claiming the crisis, that is the financial crisis of 2008, was a force majeure that relieved him from paying the debt. It was beyond my control. No, it was a bad business bet. You owe money. He also sued them for $3 billion, saying that they caused the crisis. Sure, why not? On his taxes for 2008, Trump took a write-down of $697 million, of which a whopping $651 million appears to have been from that Chicago tower. He included in those losses $94 million that he'd invested himself, plus a $557 million loan balance on the Chicago property. Trump's write-down came at a good time. He was able to carry over those losses and offset later income from The Apprentice and endorsement deals, which, according to the Times, took in $33.3 million in 2009, $44.6 million in 2010, and $51.3 million in 2011. All of that essentially became tax-free income, however, because of that 2008 write-off of his Chicago tower losses. But wait! Go ahead, are you waiting? Wait, hang on, which is easy to do after you're waiting. When you write down a bank loan, isn't that income in the form of forgiven debt? Yes, it is, as a matter of fact. And, maybe it helps if you've gotten any tax law background or or failed to pay your taxes correctly and been instructed as much. If you write down a bank loan, that is income in the form of forgiven debt. The IRS normally treats forgiven loans as taxable income. After all, if you suddenly no longer owe money on a loan because they gave you cash and you kept it and used it and now you don't have to pay them back, if it's been written down and you no longer owe any money on it, it is as if you made that money because you never had to pay it back. Trump was able to defer reporting income from his forgiven debts for years, however, under a little-known provision in the Great Recession bailout signed by President Obama, who he hated so much, of course, right? But Trump knew the bill would be coming due eventually, and he understood that he needed a way, I guess, to keep reporting real estate losses to offset that massive forgiven debt. But how to do that on a now worthless property, supposedly? Well, there's the double dip. That's the next section here. As an initial matter, let's agree that the IRS should have investigated Trump's huge $651 million worthless tax write-off that he made in 2008. Was the project really worthless? I mean, that's a good question just all by itself, right? $651 million just disappear. Even for a billionaire, that's a sizable chunk of money. Is that really something you can casually write off that way? Well, so was the project really worthless? After all, Trump was trying to claim a write-off for losing someone else's money long before that money actually was lost. And Trump was still selling condo units after that worthless declaration, even though the money that the sales brought in didn't cover his mounting construction costs. So, was the Chicago Tower really worthless in 2008? That's already pretty questionable, right? If anybody's buying units in it, it's clearly not worthless. But what he did in 2010 is even more dubious and likely illegal, and it did become the subject of a decade-plus long IRS inquiry. Well, it takes a while to unravel it, I guess, a decade. So maybe he had something when I'll release my taxes as soon as the audit is over. But his audits can take a decade or more, I guess. For no apparent reason other than to cook the books, Trump took the entity that owned the Chicago Tower and merged it into a new entity, DJT Holdings. Where did they get those initials? That new company also owned many of his other properties, including his golf course resorts, etc., etc. Within that new holding company, Trump went on to report another $168 million in losses from the Chicago Tower, the same one that was supposedly worthless. So it's now gained an additional mysterious $168 million in value and then lost that too, I guess. A worthless property that becomes more worthless, it's negative worth at some point. See the problem here? Something can't be both worthless and get written off for taxes and then later be worth something and entitle the owner to further write-offs. In short, Trump double-dipped. He deducted $168 million from nothing. And that likely illegal maneuver allowed Trump to avoid paying federal taxes later, even as he spread out his income from forgiven loans over many years. Next section, the IRS and Trump, tells us what? Trump's tax returns, had they been made fully public, oh well, never mind that, could have revealed this double dip that is now the subject of an IRS inquiry, which I guess is why he didn't reveal them. They could have revealed Trump back in 2016 to have been a tax cheat who was trying to write the same losses off twice and profiting from it to the tune of 9 figures. That might have been an election-changing event at the time. Of course, he did stand accused of that. I guess the proof wasn't released, but he did stand accused of it, and his explanation for it was, that makes me smart. So, I don't know how big of a change it would have made, but I don't know. Seeing the proof in front of you and putting a number to it might have changed more than a few votes, and that might have been enough since he didn't actually win a majority of the votes and won by the smallest of margins in the electoral figuring later on. Anyway, investigators at the New York Times could only glean from the tax documents reviewed that Trump had taken huge real estate tax losses, ones that carried over and allowed him to avoid paying federal income tax. They didn't show him performing a double dip because apparently the corporate reshuffling of the Chicago Tower into DJT Holdings had hidden it from plain view. IRS battles drag on for years, sometimes over a decade, as this one has here, and we don't know what pressures, if any, were brought to bear on the case while Trump was president for 4 of those years. But we do know that the IRS escalated the matter in 2019 and produced a lawyerly memorandum, linked to in this article here, one of only a handful it creates each year, identifying Trump only as A, and finding that what A did indeed violate a law designed to prevent double dipping. So he was, unindicted co-conspirator 1, individual 1, A. Is more documents. Interesting how many documents were created during his presidency that didn't refer to him as President Trump, but rather as hiding his identity. For some strange reason, ordinarily, the President of the United States gets an awful lot of publicity. And, of course, all publicity is good publicity, unless, of course, it would be better for you to be referred to as A or Individual 1. The scrutiny of the IRS into partnerships like the ones Trump set up to hide his double dipping explains his and the GOP's open hostility to the IRS, of course, and their constant moves to try and defund it. Meanwhile, Trump's lawyers are still battling the IRS over its conclusions in the matter. We know this only from a brief reference to the ongoing audit, which appears in the congressional record of December 2022. There's no indication of when this audit might get resolved, but if the IRS holds firm, Trump could be on the hook for a lot in back taxes. As the Times noted, from 2011 to 2017, Trump paid only, and that's 2011 to 2017, 6 years. Trump, who's supposedly a multi-billionaire, Trump paid only $643,431 on over $403 million in income, by the way, including canceled debts. This eye-popping, absurdly low figure was due to huge losses reported on his businesses. And remember, he's a business genius, including the Chicago Tower, where he had double dipped. The conclusion? Well, this quoted directly from the Times. The revisions sought by the IRS, that is, revisions to his taxes. If you did these correctly, they would say this. The revisions sought by the IRS would require amending his tax returns to remove $146 million in losses, which should be good news for him because he wants to be a genius businessman. You just made back $146 million, sort of. Not really. Okay. So the revisions would require amending tax returns to remove $146 million in losses that were claimed and add as much as $218 million in income from condominium sales. That shift of up to $364 million could swing those years out of the red and well into positive territory, creating a tax bill that could easily exceed $100 million. $100 million. So he wasn't, even Dr. Evil couldn't contemplate such a sum. As taxes. Wow. Add that to the $454 million judgment that he owes the state of New York and the $83.3 million he owes Jean Carroll, and Trump is looking very financially precarious and then running for president and opening himself up for bribes, both from the oil and gas industry and, pretty much any foreign government that might want to drop $1 billion or $2 billion in his pocket. But never mind all that. Trump now has a huge incentive to win the election, not only to install cronies within the Justice Department who would end his federal criminal prosecutions, but also within the IRS to end or further gum up this audit. It would be tempting to shrug and dismiss this story as just one more Trump fraud upon the public. Instead of turning our outrage upon Trump where it belongs, many are quick to criticize the IRS for not moving faster, just as many have the Justice Department. Some of that criticism is fair and understandable, but I want readers to zoom out a little bit. Consider this. Republicans have been trying to kneecap and punish the IRS even since Obama took office. Somehow, it has been able to continue its work in near total secrecy and achieve an internal memorandum ruling against Trump. The ex-president has had armies of lawyers and accountants working against a severely understaffed and overwhelmed agency, but some valiant folks within it have kept the fire lit. If you are frustrated at the pace of the case's resolution, imagine how these auditors and lawyers must feel. Ooh, okay, good point. To those civil servants, I say this. I need patriotic music, but anyway. We don't know who you are or how many of you are on the case, but thank you. Okay, yes, thank you for not letting this audit and this case simply disappear. That would have been extremely easy, especially after he left office. For the history books and in service of preventing similar travesties in the future, we will need a full accounting of all of Trump's many deceptions and crimes. There is one vital one yet to document. Okay, I got to keep an eye on the time here. And we hope that you will keep holding his feet to the fire and eventually force him to pay. Yes, okay. Well put. We do hope that you keep his feet to the fire. In fact, we hope that you slowly continue to feed him into the fire, feet first if you insist. I want to, lay out for you the possibility you could turn him around and feed him into the fire head first. That would be okay. It's really up to you. But if you wanted to do it traditionally, we would say, yes, keep his feet to the fire and then throw the rest of him in there eventually. I mean, you can't be expected to just hold him there forever, right? We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So I had a look briefly, really briefly, skimming through the ProPublica New York Times report on this. And it is lengthy, and I think it would probably consume the rest of the show if we read all the way through it. And I think Jay Quo has done a pretty good job summarizing all of it. The only thing I want to add to it is maybe we could read this section here about some more clarifying information about the memo that the IRS wrote. As Jay Quo kind of breezed past it, the important part that we gleaned from him was that it was a memo prepared by the IRS and released that referred to Trump only as A. Like, why would that happen? Why would they issue a report about Donald Trump's tax evasion and not say it was about Donald Trump's tax evasion? And the reason is they were producing not any sort of indictment or criminal complaint or even a civil complaint against Trump. What they were doing here was issuing an advisory memorandum that's meant for general consumption in case anybody found themselves in a similar situation and was thinking of taking or using a similar maneuver. And if you wonder, is that legal? I don't know if I want to do that if it's not legal, but it's not entirely clear to me whether it's legal or not, because I could see one argument for it being legal and one argument against it being legal. And I'm sure that Trump's lawyers viewed it that way, and then Trump viewed it as, well, the one that's right is the one where it's legal, so let's do it. But the law was unclear, and from time to time the IRS will issue memos saying, we know that there's areas where there's sometimes legitimate debate over what the state of the law is. We are going to issue this technical guidance. This is how we view it. So if you're looking for the ultimate answer of, is this thing illegal? Well, you can only get that answer in court. But if you want the answer to the question, will the IRS sue me for this? Our answer is in this document. Will we sue you? And in this case, the answer is yes. So a little bit of background about what this is and why they would be referring to him as A, for instance. Okay, so this section here in the ProPublica report, which I guess I should begin by telling you who wrote it. So Paul Keel from ProPublica and Russ Buettner from the New York Times collaborated on this. And now I hope I can scroll back down to the right place and find it again. Here it is. The IRS explained its position. I guess I should say the previous paragraph tells us what we're talking about. It's unclear when the IRS began to question the 2010 merger transaction. Remember DJT Holdings, etc. But the conflict escalated during Trump's presidency. So Trump is president at the time that the IRS dedicates the resources necessary to produce this document that refers to him only as A. The IRS explained its position. Why is what Trump did wrong, and why will the IRS sue anyone else who attempts it? It explained its position in a technical advice memorandum. That's what they call them, and there's a link directly to it if you want to read it. Released in 2019, that identified Trump only as A. Why? Because such memos are reserved for cases where the law is unclear, and they are rare, and they involve extensive review by senior IRS lawyers. The agency produced, in fact, only 2 other such memos that year. So these are for extremely tough cases, but will have some general applicability, and they are meant to guide you so that your tax lawyers can tell you whether or not you have a reasonable shot at getting away with the cheat that you want to try. And they will say, well, it's what's interesting is they'll point to this and they'll say, the IRS says they wouldn't let you get away with it because they're not letting A get away with it. Except, of course, to date, they have let A get away with it, but only because they haven't gotten around to suing him. But there's a pretty good chance that they will now that they've written this memo. The memos are required to be publicly released with the taxpayers' information removed, and this one was more heavily redacted than usual. Some partnership specialists wrote papers exploring its meaning and its importance to other taxpayers, but none identified taxpayer A as the then sitting president of the United States, which might make a difference. ProPublica and the Times matched the facts of the memo to information from Trump's tax returns and elsewhere. That's some good sleuthing. I don't know how many hints there were in the memorandum. And I mean, they really did try to simply say, well, anybody who's in this situation would be in trouble with the IRS. And that's the point of the memorandum. They probably really did try to hide his identity because it's not actually important for learning the lesson of not double dipping. And I guess it's counterproductive to the lesson to the extent that if you found out it was Trump and you realized not only is he not in trouble with the IRS and not being sued by the IRS, but also he doesn't seem to be facing much in the way of criminal liability for the crimes involved in this maneuver or elsewhere. And so far he hasn't really had consequences visited upon him. So whatever. But you as non-president of the United States will probably be in more trouble if you try this. Maybe that should be the lesson. Anyway, the 20-page document is dense with footnotes, calculations, and references to various statutes, but the core of the IRS's position is that Trump's 2010 merger violated a law meant to prevent double dipping on tax-reducing losses. If done properly, the merger would have accounted for the fact that Trump had already written off the full cost of the tower's construction with his worthlessness deduction. In the IRS memo, Trump's lawyers vigorously disagreed with the agency's conclusion, saying he had followed the law. Except they disagreed, apparently. If the IRS prevails, and they haven't yet, although usually a memo like this will serve as evidence against you in another case. If you try to do something similar, later on they will say, the IRS has already issued guidance that this is considered illegal. Why did you do it? And you'll be in bigger trouble. But they hadn't done that for Trump. If the IRS does eventually sue and prevail, Trump's tax returns would look very different, especially those from 2011 to 2017. During those years, we got the idea from the previous article. He reported $184 million in income from The Apprentice and agreements to license his name, along with $219 million from canceled debts. That is income. But he paid only $643,431 in income taxes across those, 6 years? Thanks to his huge losses on his business, which is such a shame for such a business genius. That, including, of course, the Chicago Tower. The revisions sought by the IRS, I think we read this part, would require amending his tax returns to remove $146 million in losses, add as much as $218 million in income. That shift up to $364 million could swing those years out of the red, and so therefore give him a fairly sizable tax bill, possibly in excess of $100 million. Anyway, I think that's all. After this, we overlap with what we read from Jay Quo, but I thought it was interesting or worthwhile to read a little bit about why the memo, why hide his identity, what are these things, and I think that helps make some sense and give some context to the whole memo thing and the withholding of his identity. Okay, so let's see. Got a couple of other things that we can and should spend some time on, plus some things that are from out of left field that might just be interesting to spend some time on as well. Let's see. A couple of other hits here. This I thought would be of some interest. Let's take a look at Melissa Ryan's newsletter, which has one of the more fun names of Control-Alt-Right-Delete. Remember that one? I love that name. And this, a note that I think we'll all enjoy. You gotta love the title. Farewell, Freedom Works. You remember them. Dick Armey. Not that's the guy's actual name. Some of you probably don't even remember when Dick Armey was, in fact, a powerful elected official in Washington, D.C. in the Republican House Conference, and just think his name is a funny reference to the alt-right in general. But no, he finally made his exit from elective office. I don't even remember when, but got himself hooked into the Tea Party movement, which also sort of, fizzled in its own right and was just subsumed by MAGA. And but Freedom Works was his post-elected office effort at leveraging power for himself that he was no longer entitled to exercise because he had been forced from office. But to sort of promote the Tea Party anti-tax agenda under the banner of Freedom Works. And, they hung around the fringes and made a nuisance of themselves from time to time, or sponsored events that were annoying or flamboyant in some way. And I guess now they're done. Freedom Works, a right-wing group brought to you by the Koch brothers, who also have been largely subsumed by MAGA, and the organization behind popularizing and funding the Tea Party, folded this week. Did you realize that? After its board of directors voted to dissolve, which is amazing because I've been wanting to dissolve their board for a long time, but I meant physically, like in a barrel of acid. In an interview with Politico, current president Adam Brandon. Oh, all right. Let's go, Brandon. Let's dissolve, Brandon. You could chant. That doesn't really fit in the... But anyway, he blamed, believe it or not, Donald Trump and his MAGA coalition, which is true, but as a Republican, you don't go around blaming things on Donald Trump, damn it. Anyway, here's an excerpt from what? I don't know. Let's see. What's the link go to? Oh, the Politico report about it. What What does Politico have to say? FreedomWorks is closing and blaming Trump. Well, okay, we're hearing that from Politico magazine. All right, well, let's read Melissa Ryan's summary of it, because she, like Jay Quo, will save us time and effort and focus on the real important nuggets, I think. The excerpt from Politico's reporting on it: after Trump took control of the conservative movement, Brandon said, the other Brandon, a huge gap opened up between the libertarian principles of FreedomWorks leadership, wink, wink, not really, it was gimme-tarian, and the MAGA-style populism of its members, which is amazing because they, too, are driven by gimme-tarianism. How they see this as a gap is, well, is all the money going to MAGA world, or is there enough for us to survive on here in FreedomWorks? And the answer is no. They'll dissolve based on, libertarian principles, et cetera, et cetera. And I know they love to cling to that. One of the Koch brothers, I forget which one, actually ran for vice president, maybe on a libertarian ticket at some point. Anyway, it was all fake libertarianism. And I guess now they'll say, oh, we're dissolving because of libertarian principles, and then they'll all go get jobs in MAGA organizations, which is what usually happens with these never Trumpers. They turn around and become Trumpers. J.D. Vance is doing it right now. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, all of them. Anyway, so we'll wait and see where they surface and then point and say they've done the same thing at some later date. And we'll be right. Pat yourself on the back. FreedomWorks leaders, back to Politico, for example, still believed in free trade. How nice. Small government, meh, and a robust merit-based immigration system. That's probably their big difference with MAGA. Increasingly, however, those positions clashed with a Trump-aligned membership who called for tariffs on imported goods and a wall to keep immigrants out, but were willing, in Brandon's view, to remain silent as Trump's administration added $8 trillion to the national debt. A lot of our base aged, and so the new activists that have come in with Trump, they tend to be much more populist, Brandon said. So you look at the base, and that just kind of shifted. Well, that's the end of the excerpt for the moment from Politico. And Melissa chimes in at this point. As someone who attended more than her fair share of Tea Party events and watched still more of them online in 2009, I had to laugh at the notion that Donald Trump was the reason for the shift. The Tea Party was branded as a populist political movement by FreedomWorks. It was supposed to be a hub for the more populist wing of the GOP. Yes, that's true, and an excellent point, and we probably wouldn't have gotten that from the Politico article, and only from Melissa. It's a good observation, quite true. It's just that, as it turns out, well, we're the populists. That's what they thought the play was going to be. And then a larger chunk of more gimme-tarian populists declared themselves populists, and they couldn't keep up. And again, the real irony will come when they all quit these jobs and then show up in MAGA jobs saying that they're populists. That populism, she continues, led to electoral success for the Republican Party. Tea Party candidates in 2000, those elected in 2010 and 2012, paved the way for Donald Trump and his MAGA coalition, and I think you all see that intuitively. Trump undoubtedly tapped into the localized Tea Party infrastructure organized and funded by FreedomWorks as a candidate in 2016. Without FreedomWorks and the Tea Party, there is no President Trump. Or, as Dave Karpf, a friend and political scientist who studies modern organizing and who you would have seen on social media and still do see on social media, and I think, is he not the one that was responsible for the bedbug comment about Bret Stephens? I think so. And I think that was his rise to fame outside of his usual circles, but he's famous enough inside his usual circles. And he said, when she asked, Trump turned a lot of their, that is the Tea Party's, subtext into text and was a more entertaining populist demagogue than Paul Ryan or Kevin McCarthy. Well, Kevin, I guess he's just a more popular demagogue than you are, and people care more about the election than you think anyway. So the movement conservatives, conservative media, and conservative mega donors all went along with him. And that left nothing for FreedomWorks to do if its leaders wanted to differentiate themselves from the rest of the Trump cronies. It's a real leopards eating faces party moment. Yeah, that is pretty amazing. Reading Adam Brandon's interview, it sounds like he and at least some of FreedomWorks' donors aren't exactly thrilled with how it all turned out. Brandon had already attempted to rebrand FreedomWorks as a more moderate organization, writing in a letter to donors that for the independent voters he was now trying to reach, gay marriage is a settled issue. Concerning abortion, they believe the old adage that the issue should be safe, legal, and rare. What appeals to the partisan base does not appeal to this demographic. This demographic is rejecting the Democratic message, which is actually that, but they aren't taking to the Republican message. Obviously, the rebrand was not a success. And how interesting that somebody actually tried to make a living rebranding FreedomWorks and the Tea Party agenda as essentially centrist Democratic agenda, but without being it, because those guys are dumb and wrong. But for us, gay marriage is a settled issue, and abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. That's now FreedomWorks. Wow. Anyway, it isn't now because they dissolved FreedomWorks. That they tried to, and they found out how unsuccessful it was, and then they closed up shop. FreedomWorks is now another casualty in the Trump takeover of the Republican Party, joining Project Veritas in the wingnut welfare graveyard. As a reminder, the GOP itself is flailing, with state Republican parties in complete disarray, and the National Republican Party committees trailing their Democratic counterparts in fundraising. Trump might have complete control over his party, but it comes at the cost of the infrastructure that got him over the finish line in 2016. The right's crumbling infrastructure is part of why I think Biden will win re-election in November, but it also doesn't mean that Trump and the MAGA coalition are doomed. As Tess Owen reported in Wired earlier this month, right-wing militias are once again coordinating with one another out in the open on platforms like Facebook. I've long maintained that the right isn't trying to win elections, but to seize power. I think we're probably working in parallel on that one, or at least I keep reminding everybody that it doesn't matter whether they win elections if they're intent on seizing power anyway. But as she says, I've long maintained that the right isn't trying to win elections, but to seize power. And while I wouldn't make the argument that the end of FreedomWorks is connected to a rise in militias organizing again, I will say that both happenings point to the MAGA right evolving. Okay. So, well, it certainly is that. That's clear enough. And that's the end of this piece in particular. I don't know whether we would get anything else out of scanning through the entirety of the Politico writing on it, but perhaps we will. I don't know. There is a little bit just skimming here. I happen to stick on who's speaking here. In an interview with a Politico magazine last September, an ex-FreedomWorks employee claimed that the organization under Brandon's leadership, he's mad at Brandon, that's interesting, had turned its back on its values while Trump was in office. During this period, for example, the organization issued tweets spreading election conspiracies and deflecting criticism of the Florida legislation that came to be known as the Don't Say Gay bill. He let a bunch of right-wing nut jobs turn FreedomWorks into a MAGA mouthpiece, this former FreedomWorks staffer said. There's actually another whole storyline in this Politico piece, and maybe we should read it. So an ex-FreedomWorks employee who claims that I guess prior to the attempt to rebrand as a centrist, almost democratic-leaning organization, their first instinct was to tilt right and pro-MAGA and try and latch on to the MAGA bandwagon and curry favor with Trump and MAGA troops by spreading election conspiracy theory. That's interesting. They basically tried everything and could find no purchase anywhere, to use the old archaic meaning of the word. All right. Well, that is interesting. We are coming up on the break, but I think maybe we could squeeze one thing in. You remember, let's do this. I haven't had a chance to roll through and edit for, crispness and tightness of this piece that Rosalind McGregor sent, but I also should have played it the other day. When I read to you the tweet from, did Daniel tweet it out? And then I made mention of it and I said, how great is it that Rosalind McGregor keeps us up to date all the time on Ottawa County happenings? You all knew about Ottawa County and of what moment it was, to use another archaic meaning of a word, of what moment and portent it was that there was a recall of an Ottawa Impact candidate, somebody who had won elected office as an Ottawa Impact candidate was recalled and lost their seat on the county board, and how well informed we were about what that really meant because of how much time Rosalind had spent prepping us for understanding Ottawa County. And as it turns out, I have had for some time now, I guess about a week, this report from her on that recall, and it's only going to take a couple of minutes, and if I play it now, we can get it in before the break. How about that?
Good morning, David. Today I bring some small hope that the devastating fever that's Ottawa Impact may be breaking in western Michigan. A Democrat overwhelmingly won a recall election against one of the wingnut Republicans that took over the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners. From Mitchell Waldman at the Holland Sentinel, he writes, if the results in District 2 are any indication, Ottawa Impact could be in trouble this fall. Democrat Chris Kleingens defeated incumbent Ottawa Impact Republican Lucy Ebel by 20 percentage points in a recall election Tuesday, May 7th, according to unofficial tallies. He'll now represent portions of Holland Township and Park Township. According to results on the Ottawa County Elections website, Kleingens earned 2,502 votes to Ebel's 1,665. Initial data showed a voter turnout of 20.6% across the county. Kleingens will serve on the board for the remainder of 2024, but the duo could face off again. Both candidates have filed to run for a 4-year term in the November general election. Ebel will face a primary challenge from Republican Jordan Joritsma, but Kleingens is the only Democrat running. Kleingens says the recall's votes results felt really good after a lot of hard work on the campaign trail. Quote, we did a lot of work to make this victory happen, both the volunteers that helped us and the team that helped me channel everything into getting this win, he told the Sentinel. It's nice to see that voters of this district responded to that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve my district and my neighbors. I have the opportunity to go to work for the residents of the district and show them that I'm willing to work for them, Kleingens said. At this point, I'm just looking forward to that opportunity and learning how to do it as well as I can, unquote. He said the priorities he heard from constituents on the campaign trail included affordable housing and food insecurity, including the hot topic of the Ottawa Food Coordinator position. Doug Zylstra, a fellow commissioner, and until now, the only Democrat on the board, wrote on social media that Kleingens will be an asset. Quote, I'm very excited to have Chris join us on the board, Zylstra posted on Twitter. His knowledge and common sense will be of deep value to us, and I believe to all county residents who look to the board to provide the high-quality county services that Ottawa County has long been known for, unquote. Recall language against Ebel was submitted July 3rd, 2023, the first day commissioners elected in November 2022 were eligible for recall. The Ottawa County Election Commission approved the language July 17th. Ebel appealed, but her argument was rejected on August 26th, opening a 60-day signature gathering window. The recall effort had to submit a minimum of 2,480 signatures, 25% of the number of voters who cast a ballot in the most recent gubernatorial race in Ebel's district. On October 24th, more than 3,000 signatures were submitted. 2,653 were verified as valid by the clerk's office. So, David, other people have stepped up to challenge more Ottawa Impact Board of Commissioner officials this coming November, which brings me hope to restore sane governance in a county known for being quietly boring and a desirable place to live along the shores of Lake Michigan. Back to you, David.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad we got to check in with you on that one, and also we can find out how to pronounce Lucy Ebble's name, because it gave us, some question back when I was updating everybody on that one, but we had already been updated. I wish I had played it then, but it was much more fun to say, hey, I just saw a mention of Ottawa County happening in other quarters, and it was like a reference as though it was some obscure backwater, which, to some extent, I suppose that they wish it still was. But on the other hand, they really did. Rosalind's done a tremendous job in just bringing it to our attention such that there's this whole, cohort of KITM listeners that can tell you all about Ottawa County and the battles being fought there and what it means for Ohio in general. And I guess it's a little bit like finding out about crucial Waukesha County in Wisconsin. And we appreciate being informed on that front. Okay, so let's see. I would love to bring you another story or two, because there's, like another hour left to the show. However, this is interesting. We've been waiting for the spinning pinwheel of death to go away on the laptop. Luckily, there are other screens available to us so that we can bring you some other stories, but it is almost break time. So we have that excuse, and the pinwheel of death has another minute to resolve itself, but I think it's been spinning this whole time. So I might have to reboot the laptop during that, but I don't think it's going to affect our signal any. But anyway, let's get ready to roll out the 1 minute break music, and then we can search around for something to share for the next half hour or so. And after that, segment 4 comes around. It's time to check in with Joan McCarter. Can tell us a little bit about what might be happening. We'll say usually Capitol Hill, of course, being her beat. But, we'll throw the thing wide open and see what she's talking about and see if maybe she'd like to surprise us with something else at the end. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, can't get rid of this thing and can't force it closed at this point yet. Maybe it'll pop up in the middle of the next segment and we'll get a chance to set things right. But in the meantime, we'll start opening alternatives on other screens. I had at the ready for you, and this will take a little more engineering, but something from Josh Marshall that he wrote up on the Israel-Gaza front that might be of some importance, some good background information that I thought we might add to the picture here. He writes under the headline of one of his editor's pieces, Tragedy and Folly is the headline, and begins this way. It gets lost in the myriad headlines at the moment about Rafah, weapons cutoffs, Biden, horrific civilian loss of life, etc. I know it's an unfortunate placement of the etc. I mean, are you yada-yadaing the horrific civilian loss of life? Not what he's actually doing. But there's a short piece in the Times of Israel this afternoon. This would have been not yesterday afternoon, but Saturday, I think, that captures a dimension of what's happening right now in Israel that is mostly off the radar in the U.S. The piece is about a reported blow-up between Netanyahu and IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. We'll see if we got his pronunciation correctly or not. Specifically, it has the latter, Halevi, telling Netanyahu that because he, Netanyahu, refuses to make diplomatic arrangements for the post-war government of Gaza, the IDF is having to go back to fight again in areas that it already took over. In some cases, they're having to go back and fight for the same ground a third time. In other words, they're being sent in with the mission, and then that's, a dubious designation for it. The mission of clearing out or rooting out Hamas fighters and Hamas infrastructure that they're sent to destroy, and I guess presumably doing so, and then having cleared the area, leaving the area to go do the same elsewhere, only to find out that because no plans have been made for the governance of the physical territory once they leave, well, what happens? Hamas or some other malignant organization simply moves back in once the Israeli forces depart. So they're doing themselves no good, and in some cases they have then gone back, cleared it out again, and left, only to find that it has once again been infested by Hamas control for a third time, which probably speaks to a number of things, not limited to the fact that, well, if you don't leave behind a governing structure that holds the territory, well, yeah, that's likely to happen. And two, it, I guess, speaks to the resiliency of Hamas in some way. Anyway, here's another article that he points to and links to in Haaretz, another Israeli paper, on how the IDF is now going back into northern Gaza, which they conquered back in the fall. Privately, the IDF says Hamas has reestablished control there in northern Gaza because there's been no day after plan, which is a diplomatic to-do item. If you blow it up and leave, why wouldn't Hamas just go back? And indeed, that's exactly what they have done. Okay. Well, some of the pinwheel of death issues are resolving themselves, but not all. Okay. Let's see if it gets any better while we're reading. Netanyahu refuses to do that is, come up with a day after plan. Okay, here we go. No, we'll just restart Firefox on the other screen and see if that helps. I think it's not going to help. Probably should have closed it out instead. Maybe we'll do it that way. Okay, but we'll continue for now on the other screen. Netanyahu has refused to do that is to say, to come up with a day after plan, because there's really no way to plan for the future without blowing up his governing coalition. And that is likely true. And he's only holding it together. He's operating in many ways like the Republicans are operating in the House of Representatives. There's only the most narrow majority that he can technically put together. And if any of them hold out, there's the threat of vacating the chair, or at least not being able to govern as a majority and having to turn to Democrats to do the work for them, passing everything by suspension of the rules, et cetera, et cetera. That they don't work exactly the same way. But again, his governing coalition is holding on by the skin of its teeth. So without some plan, though, the Israeli army is reduced to doing something like pushing water up a hill with its hands. The article is replete with examples of heads of the army or intelligence services trying to get someone to give them a strategy, or actually more than a strategy, just a goal. It has Netanyahu getting mad because they're going to the defense minister, himself a former high-level IDF general. And it's not even a question of disagreeing on strategy, really. That's for the political leadership to decide. It's refusing to come up with any strategy at all. That is problematic. Okay. Things are resolving themselves on the other computer screen, so that's good news. Let's see. We'll get everything back up to speed so that I can have all the various inputs available and hear from everybody and get ready for Joan's segment later on. But continuing with Josh Marshall's observations here, the simple fact is that Netanyahu has waged an unimaginably destructive war with a massive loss of life and managed to accomplish much less than Israel could have if it had had a clear strategy of what it was trying to do, or specifically, Who would rule Gaza after Hamas had been displaced? Some of this goes beyond Netanyahu's failings as a leader. The war launched in a climate of unparalleled outrage over the October 7th massacres, with what were probably unrealistic objectives: destroying Hamas's military capacity in toto, killing or capturing their soldiers, eliminating the weaponry and rocket capacity, as well as the critical tunnel infrastructure. But that was a long time ago, 7 months ago. I often hear people saying that Netanyahu is just continuing the war indefinitely because that's the only way he can stay in power. In practice, it amounts to that. But I think to capture his full folly and failure as a leader, you have to go a bit deeper. He's fighting the best war he can, which is horrible, but only within the bounds of what his coalition will allow, which essentially means fighting with no strategy. I mean, if you actually try to nail down a strategy, parts of his coalition will fracture and leave, right? No strategy. And what that means for the IDF is just keep chasing Hamas around and killing Hamas soldiers or rooting them out from parts of the strip. So the IDF roots them out and then they leave. And then a month later, Hamas fighters filter back in and you're back to where you were in the first place. Only now all the buildings are destroyed and lots of civilians are dead. So again, massive destruction and loss of life and not that much even accomplished. Again, it's like trying to push water uphill with your hands. This anger within the Israeli military at a total lack of goals or strategy has been bubbling for months. I also suspect this is the real reason for the refusal to supply weaponry for an assault on Rafah. As I noted in an earlier post, Josh says, I've picked up through hints in the Israeli press and other ways that there are real misgivings about such an assault within the Israeli national security echelon itself. I suspect largely because it's just a much bigger and deadlier version of the chasing folly, unless there's a clear strategy for what happens after it's done. And there is no strategy. But yeah, Netanyahu is really kind of caught up in the fact that he has such a tenuous coalition. Like, if you just stop and think about it a little deeper, I mean, he makes a lot of assumptions about how much discussion there's been among his audience. Maybe there's been much more because he's been priming it. But here, we haven't necessarily discussed every bit of it, but we've given bits and pieces and hints along the way, just in keeping you updated about not just the war, but Israeli politics preceding the war and now surrounding the war. Plus, of course, your understanding that you've gained for what it's like to govern with a very narrow majority from our coverage of what's going on in the House. And essentially what he's got here is, so supposing you tried to come up with a plan for who will govern Gaza afterwards. You could start from, most likely the members of the Israeli governing coalition will be starting from the assumption that will rule Gaza afterwards. There are, in fact, members of government who favor resettling Gaza with Israeli settlers, much the same way as they do in parts of the West Bank, or if they had their way, all of the West Bank and all of Greater Israel, that there would be no restrictions on Israeli settlement of Palestinian lands. But what are Palestinian lands? For the moment, they are, these regions in which they were given after the Oslo Accords. I don't even know if I have the right accords left anymore, but the peace process of the Clinton years and then later Oslo Accords, if that is even later. I don't even know where our accords are settled anymore at this point. But what we've come to understand as Palestinian administered regions like the West Bank, governed by the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza, the other Palestinian enclave, all the way on the other side of Israel along the Mediterranean, physically separated by Israeli territory from the other Palestinian governed or operated areas in the West Bank. And because of the disconnect, they've developed differently and in different, almost cultural differences between the two, and of course a governing difference. And that's at the heart of what the problems are, and it's the heart of the problems for Gaza, which are separate and distinct, though have the same roots as the problems in the West Bank. But the Palestinian Authority rules essentially in the West Bank, whereas Hamas rules in Gaza. And that's complicated as well. And in fact, in the one and only election that was held in Gaza, it was not Hamas that was elected to govern there, but rather, it was mixed results, with Hamas contesting those elections but not winning an outright governing coalition or majority there, but rather that power being divided between them and Fatah, the party essentially rules things in the name of, or provides the governing power behind the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, but Hamas murdered all of their elected officials and became the de facto power there. So elections didn't take in Gaza, but that's got all sorts of mixed meanings, both for Palestinians in general, the question of whether or not the people of Gaza actually ever chose to be governed by Hamas, that in large part they did not. And they find themselves, to the extent that they're at all willing to, I don't know what, you can't even say that they support Hamas in many cases. They're being forced to, and it's military might that forces them to do it. And it's just, when we say military might, we really are talking about a terrorist organization that terrorizes its own people as much as anybody else. So, no, you can't actually hang that around the necks of the Palestinians in Gaza. There's an awful lot to it. But, but because the Israeli governing coalition includes people who would just as readily and just as happily choose to settle Gaza with Israelis, which, of course, means clearing out the Palestinians, which, of course, means, yes, you're talking about an actual ethnic cleansing. If you don't land entirely on genocide, you can certainly say, well, you can't imagine members of the governing Israeli governmental coalition saying, yes, we'll just live side by side with Gaza and Palestinians in Gaza. No, they won't. They'll be clearing them out, and they'll be clearing them out violently, if not using the IDF, then using their own weaponry in militia style, the way they're doing in the West Bank, and simply harassing, firing at, and killing local Palestinians, and then occupying their homes and saying this land will be Israeli occupied now, despite the fact that it isn't being done by the IDF in the West Bank, but it's being done with the IDF watching in the background. If things get too dangerous and the Palestinians start shooting back at the freelancers settling in the West Bank, then the IDF does step in. So, talk about, it's the biggest possible thumb you could be putting on the scale. Anyway, there are members of the Israeli governing coalition who, if you were to say something, remotely sensible about what to do with Gaza the day after you theoretically destroy all of Hamas, and all you've got left are wonderful civilian Gazans who want nothing more than to live in peace. Let's say that happens. Would you turn over governance to the Palestinians? Let's have another election so you can elect somebody else. Well, first of all, there are members of the Israeli government who would say, no, let's not have that. Let's instead settle it with Israelis. But if you were to say, let's give the Palestinians back control over the enclave of Gaza. One of the other problems is the other part of the governing coalition is Netanyahu's. And Netanyahu has been opposed to that forever, because if they were to choose someone other than Hamas, because let's say all of Hamas was dead, they would choose probably the Fatah party or those aligned with the Palestinian Authority who rule the West Bank, which is contrary to Netanyahu's policy. He doesn't want to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and doesn't want Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank governed by the same people and the same coalition, because then they would present themselves as a unified front capable of assuming actual autonomy and independence and governance of the Palestinian territories as an independent state, which is in opposition to Netanyahu's position. So any solution for Gaza would fracture his coalition, although I suppose the only one that wouldn't, I guess at the end of the day, it's possible that he wouldn't fracture his coalition if he just went along with the ultra-right and said, yes, we will clean out Gaza and destroy the Palestinian way of life there and replace it entirely with Israeli settlement, which would, of course, put him in opposition and as a, put him in position of being Israel as a universally recognized pariah state instead of a state that is designated as a pariah by 75% or more of the rest of the world's governing nations. But anyway, it creates that difficulty, which is fairly tremendous. And so as a result, they simply say, well, can't we all agree that killing Hamas is a fantastic goal? And it has worked to date. And even works to some extent with the international community because they are perfectly willing to identify Hamas as universally bad guys. They are a terrorist organization and are designated as such and probably shouldn't be governing anything and never were really any good at it, never really any interest in governing for the benefit of the Gazan people anyhow. So they're able to find some unity on that. But I guess at some level, I guess what we're learning from this is the IDF says, well, that's interesting as a political unification point. Everybody in Israel opposes Hamas, but we're not doing a very good job of being rid of Hamas forever with this strategy of clear them out, then leave, and let the chips fall where they may. That's not working. And we can't simply say, well, we'll just turn this into an annex of Israel, because that doesn't work for the rest of Israel. Politically, they oppose that and won't go along with it and will call for immediate elections that will end up toppling the Netanyahu government, which would be great, but you're not going to see the Netanyahu government planning for that. So they're stuck. It is an interesting conundrum, and we'll have to see whether it gets resolved. And in another country, you would probably point to this tremendous conflict between the democratically elected government of the country and the widely revered defense forces, armed forces of the country. I mean, the name says defense. Many of you may disagree, but it does bear that name. But if you have a conflict between the democratically elected government of the country and a widely popular, widely supported armed forces of the country, well, in more cases than not, the armed forces wins that battle and ends up assuming governmental control. But of course, if you do that, then you lose the one thin reed that Israel is able to cling to in world opinion, to the extent that there are still people who view it as a democratic society, and one of the only democratic societies in the Middle East. A military coup to replace the democratically elected, though possibly even more fascist than the armed forces government. Well, anyway, yeah, you really pull the rug out from under yourself if you do away with your democratically elected government on top of it all. It's pretty crazy out there. All right. Let's see. Other things to share with you before we end segment 3 and get a chance to talk to Joan. And now that things are up and rebooted, I can reopen my link to her latest diaries and see what's up in that respect. Let's see. What can we share with you in between? How about if we read through that long-threatened read of Dahlia Lithwick's How Originalism Ate the Law, because I know this will be of some interest, at least, if not the sole focus of what Joan's been looking at. This will be of some interest. She's probably read over the article and might even be able to offer some additional opinion on it. And this, Greg mentioned, one of a series of articles in Slate about the subject that Dahlia Lithwick and others have contributed to. This one is solely her own work. How Originalism Ate the Law. America is captive to a legal theory that dictates our laws on guns, abortion, and so much more. We need to act. Likely true. Let's see what she's talking about here. As we mentioned, How Originalism Ate the Law is a Slate series about the legal theory that ruined everything. And here's how. America is being led astray by a small handful of folks who are drunk driving on originalism, and not in a funny Marx Brothers spin around in circles and fall down sort of way, though that would be the way that Greg prefers, I am sure, because it's got the Marx Brothers in it. No, it's in a children murdered in their classrooms, women hemorrhaging in parking lots, environmental and health regulations destroyed kind of way. You know, the bad way. And that's because the whole nation is currently lashed to a small, stupid, perpetually changing theory of legal interpretation variously known as originalism or textualism or original public meaning or history and tradition. I would add constitution and exile way. A theory that is, unless you were born in the 1990s, younger than you are. And of course, I was born before the 1990s, so you know. I'm a little older than that, but that's true. And there's as I'm saying it, I'm thinking there's a parallel to Israel as well. We're lashed to an ideology that doesn't make any sense and isn't actually favored by a majority of the voters in this country. But if we set out to root it out, it leaves us without a governing theory in some cases, because it has totally subsumed the regular body of law along the way. Anyway, whatever the current flavor, originalism and its ever-growing progeny hold that judges and justices should ignore every interpretive methodology judges once used to understand a legal text in favor of free-floating feelings about history. What do we think the drafters of the text intended? What do we wish they had intended? What did the readers of a contemporaneous public documents understand that text to mean? What did random dictionaries of the time reflect about words? What, as cited by a lawyer for former President Donald Trump in arguing recently that presidents can occasionally order political assassinations without facing criminal consequences, what did Benjamin Franklin announce at the Constitutional Convention? And also, how did the crowd react? What difference would that possibly make? And by the way, a couple of the things that Benjamin Franklin said in and around the Constitutional Convention would surprise you if you were Donald Trump and hoping to, not be assassinated, for instance. As John Sauer, that Trump lawyer in question, put in a court filing, the framers viewed the prosecution of the chief executive as a radical innovation to be treated with great caution. Benjamin Franklin stated at the Constitutional Convention, history furnishes one example of a first magistrate being formally brought to public justice. Everybody cried out against this as unconstitutional. He cited the same piece of historical proof at the argument. I would quote from what Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention, which I think reflects best the founders' original understanding and intent here, which is at the Constitutional Convention. Call it perhaps, that goes around in circles. Let me see if I read that right. I would quote from what Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention, which I think reflects best the founders' original understanding and intent here, which is at the Constitutional Convention. I see. So the founders' intent is best expressed by what happened at the Constitutional Convention. Okay. So then you would cite what Benjamin Franklin said there? Yes. Okay. Well, what did he say? That isn't actually included in the quote, though I assume he did give over some time to that at some point during the arguments. All right. Well, you know what? As a matter of fact, we're creeping up on our last break here, so we're not going to get that much further in this, which means it was a huge mistake to begin because, we haven't even gotten to the opening arguments of this piece. But at any rate, here's what we'll do. We can set that up as a possible discussion point as we wait for Joan to join us. And, if there's nothing super exciting happening because we're all just stuck on another bunch of suspension bills because that's all the House can do, we could mention that and the fact that they are going to reauthorize the FAA anyway, and then see where the discussion leads us. And hey, if it leads us right back to a critique of originalism, so much the better. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
Guess who's in Manhattan today?
Well, why don't you tell us as we rejoin the program? Good morning. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Joan is with us. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see, our first puzzle is to guess who's in Manhattan today. Mm-hmm. Okay. Are they visiting the Trump trial, or is it Trump himself?
They are indeed visiting the Trump trial.
Who's visiting? I don't know. We've had a list of Republican members of Congress and candidates. Who's there today? I don't know if I can guess.
None other than House Speaker Mike Johnson.
Oh, okay. Why has he got nothing else to do?
Apparently not.
Okay, it's Tuesday, and I guess they can wait for him to get back because it's a return to Washington Day for most of them. But okay, I guess all they have really on the schedule is probably a bunch of more
it's
small ball suspensions. So I guess he can afford to spend the day there and probably get back. He doesn't cast any votes anyway, so okay. So he's not going to be missing much, but I guess it's a slow day. But everybody has to go. And is this something that Trump is demanding of people, or just sort of, they're doing it because they understand that he... Don't make me say it. I need you to show up. I guess that's what's happening.
Clearly there's the people auditioning to be Veep.
Yeah.
Doug Burgum is one of them that's showing up today.
Yeah.
Vivek Ramaswamy. I have not had to say his name out loud before.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's been there.
Huh.
J.D. Vance, of course, has been there. This is...
Yeah, I saw him taking pictures with his phone like a fanboy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's required of people who want to be vice president, and I suppose Johnson also figures it's required of him if he wants to continue to lead House Republicans.
Yeah, I guess so. Or he just sort of has this thing that he wants to show up at news-making sites. So, like, he went to the campus protests to be a Republican there.
But this was a little bit more serious.
I guess.
He's calling the trial a sham.
Okay.
This is basically Mike Johnson declaring that, yes, the president is above the rule of law.
Yeah, that's troublesome.
This is a criminal trial.
Yeah. And, campus protests aren't a branch of government. You don't go, to show up at court saying this whole third branch is stupid. And it's not a federal trial or anything, but I mean, just basically attacking the judicial system in toto here. No matter how and on what level you try President Trump, it's a travesty. Whether there's evidence against him or not, who cares? Huh. Okay, so he's gone to declare that a travesty against justice, and that the president, or even people who used to be president or might want to be president again later, are immune from things if they're Republicans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Meanwhile,
yes,
Johnson is also blocking, delaying, stonewalling, whatever you want to call it, the placement of a memorial plaque for the cops who defended the Capitol on January 6th.
I see. Okay.
It was supposed to be completed in March of 2023. So
they're late.
He's not doing it by himself. Kevin McCarthy helped too.
Oh, yeah, but he's gone.
But meanwhile, another meanwhile.
Yeah.
I've been watching Stephen Colbert too much.
Okay.
He's holding a prayer vigil in the Capitol today for Police Week.
Oh.
So they're honoring
but
police
different police.
With a prayer vigil in the Capitol and refusing to memorialize the Capitol Police who defended the building on January 6th.
We want to pay tribute to the police who defend other people, I guess, but not us for some strange reason. That is interesting. And so a prayer vigil for police. When's that happening?
Sometime today.
Okay. Well, he'll fly back
once he gets back.
Okay.
It was definitely a photo op. For Johnson.
How interesting. So
he showed up in the entourage for the cameras, and then at 10:45 is expected. So in the next 10 minutes, he's expected to go out and speak and say to the cameras, "This is all a sham. I'm here with millions of Americans who think that this trial should not be happening." Blah 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 blah. And then he'll fly back to D.C.
All right. Will he hold up a Bible
for all of the cops who did not defend the Capitol?
Yeah. Right. We're praying for more provincial police to join the riot next time so they can overwhelm the cops that we have here.
Yes.
Great. The memorial plaque was supposed to have been made, and I guess maybe where were they going to put it? In the Capitol, but I
think it's within the Capitol. I think it's inside in the west side of the Capitol.
Okay.
I'm
just curious,
an NBC story.
If they're waiting for so long, can the Senate say, "I'll tell you what, we'll put it on our part"?
Yeah.
The House apparently has no interest in honoring police, though they're going to have a prayer vigil, but the plaque is a year behind already. And, let's go to signs in a day and get the damn thing printed, and we'll put it on the Senate side. And I imagine they want a more serious plaque than that, but, so he's doing everything he can to delay that, but also to be photographed praying for police, just not those police.
Just not those police.
It's so amazing. What an incredible pretzel to twist yourself into. Okay, well, we're pro-police because that's Republican ideology, but we're against the police we have here that protect us because they didn't let us take over the government and then force them to protect us as a fascist government later on. So we're against those police.
Against those police.
Well,
you can't forget in all of this that Mike Johnson was basically the architect of the strategy for the House in overturning the election.
Right. Yeah. Just
back in January.
I didn't want to do it violently. I just simply wanted to do away with democracy very quickly, but in an orderly fashion. They didn't actually need police to do it per se, but We would have needed them later when the other half of the country stormed the Capitol in anger over having lost their country. Then we would have needed you. But they never did get around to that one. All right. Well, so photo op in New York, then back to D.C. for another photo op. Ironically, he doesn't hold Bibles up in his photo ops the way Donald Trump does, which is really amazing. He should. He's the guy everybody thinks of as holding up a Bible. And the other guy
brings us back to Liz Cheney. She had a good one this morning.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm surprised that Speaker Johnson wants to be in the I cheated on my wife with a porn star club. I guess he's not that concerned with teaching morality to our young people after all.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I know why he's there to support Trump just in general, but yeah, he is. There were other trials you probably should have showed up for.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go to the porn star one. All right.
Go to the porn star one, and yes, your Christian values will be on display.
Yeah.
Later on Tuesday as he prays for the cops.
But he showed up on the day.
Boy.
I guess Michael Cohen is still on the witness stand today. Maybe his son wouldn't let him go when Stormy Daniels was on the stand. Because if you look at a porn star, you have to tell me about it.
That's very possible.
That could have been it. I'll wait for a non-porn witness so that I can go. Yeah, Mike Pence's wife wouldn't even have let him been in the courtroom if there was a woman in it. So maybe that's
unless she was there as well.
Right. Well, I guess maybe she would have gone. I don't know. Moms
Mother
for Liberty.
Had to be there for these things, didn't she?
Yeah, I guess so. Well,
if I'm remembering correctly.
Well, they're a weird bunch. And so back.
They're a weird bunch, and I think Mike Johnson can kiss any support from Democrats to save his ass again goodbye with this stunt.
Yeah, all right. Well, hold on. I got to call Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Let's root for Marjorie Taylor Greene trying again.
Yeah. Hello, Marjorie. Did she go by Marge? I don't know. No, I've never greeted her. But anyway, I guess I'd give her a call and say, now might be a great time to try that again and see if you can't get more Democrats to at least vote present or something like that. So that that I'm sure is disappointing, but it's to be expected, and there's no substantive problem with the Speaker of the House being a lickspittle Republican.
No,
but
there is kind of a problem with the third person in line to the presidency.
Yes,
going into a courtroom and saying it's illegitimate.
Yeah, he could stay away and say...
That's a bit of a problem.
That's true. And that's a good point. I mean, it's not surprising. He is who he is. He is a right-wing authoritarian Republican at heart. But yeah, it's still the play there is, we let the justice system work itself out here. We don't interfere and go and tell you that the... as you mentioned, second in line to the presidency and ostensible head of at least one part of the legislative branch says that Article 3, well, not Article 3, but the legislative branch and the judicial system are an inconvenience at best and a joke at worst, and we ought to do something about it and make our president immune from everything. Yeah.
It's kind of problematic.
Yeah. Well, maybe he'll be struck by lightning at the prayer vigil. It's a dangerous game. But, I don't think any lightning storms predicted for the Washington, D.C. area. That we saved that all for the Aurora Borealis, of course, and used it all up.
Did you get to see it?
I did not. It was entirely clouded over, but only for a strict 48-hour period. Of Friday and Saturday. And then it cleared up on Sunday. But
it was clear here, but it was 2:00 in the morning. So
yeah. Oh, well. Did you get to take a look?
No.
No.
I couldn't stay awake.
Oh, I can't blame you. And it reserves it for, it means you still get to plan yourself a trip to the far north at one point.
Right.
So you don't want to take that away from yourself. Yeah.
Or Alaska.
Yeah.
Yeah.
excellent and a good way of doing it. And I don't want to miss out on that trip because there's also other fun things that happen during the day there. So, all right. Well, what else on the plate for today? I'm trying to take a quick look. I was trying to scan the diaries earlier, and everything froze up on me, and I never got a chance to look back. So,
the Daily Coast freeze on you?
It wasn't. No, I didn't. It was
okay.
Something else, completely different, but it made it impossible to scan. So I'm not caught up on what are your latest diaries, but actually, as I'm scrolling through, I think we've actually touched on most of it already. But.
Yes, I had a bit of a relapse over the last 2 weeks, so I missed quite a bit of work.
Okay.
And Mike Johnson has just dominated, unfortunately, my life.
Well, that is
but
unfortunate.
We have, interesting things coming up.
Okay.
There will be some decisions from the Supreme Court released Thursday.
Oh, we're at that
They're
stage.
done with arguments outside of the shadow docket, which, aren't arguments anyway. But,
right.
but they have no more petitions to hear, no more cases to officially hear.
Okay.
And we'll start releasing their decisions possibly as soon as Thursday.
Okay. So some monumental mistakes ready to be made.
Yep.
Okay. Which are we? I mean, we're waiting. I assume that the Trump immunity waits for the last possible minute. Mm-hmm. That's what everybody's thinking is, unless they surprise everybody.
And I probably think abortion pill last minute.
Yeah, okay.
Emergency docs and abortion probably last minute. So before that, we will get whether or not we'll have a government that can regulate private business.
Oh. What? We don't do that.
Not a lot. No.
Unless it's your business. But yeah.
But the overturning of the regulatory framework of the U.S. government.
All of how.
Pop up in the next few weeks.
Okay. So, they could, I wonder what they think that would do to their caseload. Eliminate it entirely and leave them on vacation permanently, or lots of appeal. I mean, there's no appealing from it. So, I mean, not that direct, but other people trying to find ways of convincing them. Well, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a regulatory structure in place for this? Yes, no, I don't know.
Making sure that there aren't worms in our food that get into our brains.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know that, or how about should we, for instance, allow construction of nuclear power plants along the lines of maybe the way you would build a Cybertruck or something like that? I don't know. Maybe plastic would be okay for a containment.
How much lead can be in our water?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, right, sure. How much can you tolerate? Let's see. Mix it in and see when people start to drop, and how long it takes them to drop too, because maybe that's fine. Maybe living to 40 is enough. We don't know. Okay, so the whole basic structure of how the federal government draws its authority for regulation is now in question, and has been under attack for some time by individual lunatic judges in single districts, etc. Is this the provenance though of how this particular case made it to the Supreme Court? I'm not certain that I recall what district.
Off
they
the
brought
top of my head, do not
in.
recall the path it took.
Yeah.
If it came through Texas, it probably came through the Fifth Circuit. Most everything does. Yeah,
that dominates the agenda. All right, so let's see. So as soon as Thursday cases start to be announced, and some of these things will be strung along for some time, but it's by June, end of June, is usually when they target being done.
Usually,
is that right?
they've lapped into July a few times.
Okay,
but it's usually by the end of June.
Yeah, and right, it's there. A couple of justices have got to take vacations with billionaires soon.
Right.
So they want to be out out the door as soon as
Clarence
possible.
has to get in his RV with Ginny and
yeah,
go see the wonders of Walmart parking lots.
right. Although I have seen, by the way, that our local Walmart parking lot has big signs up that say no overnight parking. So I don't know. It's like, I guess that'll become unconstitutional next year. So I don't know where people are supposed to park their RVs anymore, but he's graduated to super yachts anyway. So
yeah.
Well, okay. So a couple of decisions we should be on the lookout for. Not much happening, I would imagine. Although I was able to update everybody that the FAA reauthorization passed the Senate that you warned us about.
There will be those. It's 10 flights.
10. Oh, okay.
International.
Yeah.
I refuse to call it by the other name.
Okay.
So an additional 10 flights, one of which will go to San Antonio, Texas.
Important.
I mean, this is clearly Republican members of Congress who want their round trip, or rather their nonstop flights.
Yeah. Okay. San Antonio.
Well, without having to go to Dulles or to BWI in order to get there.
Okay. I mean, on the flip side, now I can get to San Antonio if I want to visit on a direct flight.
But
although I would have gone from Dulles.
Dulles.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
This is the problem. They don't want to have to go all the way out to Dulles. I remember.
Yeah.
When I worked for him, hated having to go out there.
I am
hated
sure.
it.
It's a long flight from the West Coast anyway, from Pacific Northwest, anywhere in the area, and then to have to top it off with, I guess, the extra drive.
The extra drive to there, and it's a big airport. National is small. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to get to your gates.
Yes.
He resented the fact that he had to take a people mover.
But those things are so fun.
To get to his terminal.
Yeah. I mean, it does take a while to get out of there. Like, you land at Dulles and somebody's picking you up. It's still, an hour before you're going to get to the curb.
Yeah.
Because, sure, it does take a while. Although we did build a whole big road that just takes you direct to Washington, D.C., and nobody can get in your way for the first part of it. Then they all get in your way on Route 66, and then you're in trouble. That's not our doing.
Anyway, FAA is going to be reauthorized.
Guess so.
With these 10 additional round trips. I'm sorry.
10 additional route. It was 10, I think that you just said.
It's 10.
Last week we thought it was 5, but apparently 10. Are there no other I was wondering whether they were going to do a direct flight from like Lubbock or something so they could fly Matthew Kaczmarek's decisions direct to the Supreme Court with that. But I guess they can send that in an email.
Yeah.
So, okay. That doesn't need to go. But it was exciting to be able to tell people. The House has that on
fight, of course.
Which fight?
It wouldn't be Tuesday on Kagro in the morning if we did not talk about government funding.
That's right. True.
Mama Kagro, Mom.
There you go. Let's let her know that we're on, and it's getting to be that time when, it's always time to identify the fact that Republicans will screw up government funding at some point, and it's now in place all the way through September, but now is the time to remind everybody, they're going to screw that up in September. For
yes.
Sure. Okay, you're right. And what specifically prompts that reminder?
The House Republicans are expected to release their top line numbers this week.
Okay.
For what they want in FY 2025.
All right.
The Freedom Caucus has already set out their list of demands.
Zero. Yeah. No money for the government.
They want the current levels to be continued into next year, when they think they'll have the House, the Senate, and President Trump.
Okay.
They're pulling sort of the argument that Mitch McConnell used to block Merrick Garland's appointment to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I see.
We have to let the new president decide what the budget's going to be.
Okay. So there's only a president only gets to write a budget for 3 years. And by the way, they oppose all 3 of those budgets, no matter what they say. And then you're also not allowed to do one in the last year. I could see that argument. And although it's interesting because, I mean, I guess, I wonder what kind of leverage they'll have. If they're saying that their preferred formal budget is to continue the funding at current levels, that's as good as the CR. And they used to complain, no, we don't want to do any more CRs because it continues the old budget. But now they're saying they do want to continue the old budget. Or that's the best they can hope for. I guess,
You cannot expect consistency from the Freedom Caucus.
No, that would be ridiculous. And I guess that's true. That's just the Freedom Caucus position. We don't know whether there's a different position coming from Mike Johnson eventually in the mainstream-ish part of the Republican conference, which is just as bad as any
there's going to have to be.
Ever has been. Okay.
Because he doesn't want government to shut down. Mm-hmm. So they'll figure it out. They're not going to have a government shutdown before the election. But it's going to be ugly, as usual. Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult, as usual. It's going to set us up for miserable holidays in December, as usual.
Okay. That's their chief concern, I think, these religious types. Misery during Christmas. I don't know how.
Yeah, there really isn't much else that they need to do between now and the end of the year besides get reelected. Fund the government and get reelected. Okay. That's not to say we're not going to see plenty of messaging bills kicked out by Johnson and team. They saved our refrigerators last week.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Hoo-ha!
Yeah, my refrigerator was very worried. It told me, but now it's okay, and all the appliances are safe apparently, and now I guess we just watched to see whether they complicate things for themselves and whether Marjorie Taylor Greene tries to vacate the chair as he's executing the non-strategy heading to the end of the year and elections, but avoiding a government shutdown if possible. That's going to be interesting.
She's showing no signs of not doing it. I mean, she's determined. It's
I guess.
Going to stay out there. She has Massey with her. And obviously, Johnson showing up to Trump's trial is to try to somehow get those Freedom Caucus members who might vote with her to his side. Good luck.
Yeah, I don't know if that will convince anybody. Yeah, they seem determined, or at least Greene seems determined not to credit him at all for showing up. That's not going to change her mind.
It's not going to change her mind. Trump couldn't change her mind. He told her not to do it, apparently. She did it. She's not going to stop, near as I can tell.
He's not able to use any leverage against her. She's not in need of fundraising in the same way that he is. And
she doesn't care if she gets kicked off committees. She's been kicked off committees before. She's okay with that.
Okay. Well, that makes it difficult to predict what she'll try because, I mean, it doesn't hurt her any, but it's also useless so far. But I guess, like as you point out, Democrats, if they change their mind as a bloc, it becomes effective after all. But no one wants to cooperate with Marjorie Taylor Greene. But
yes.
Yeah. So,
what if it comes from Chip Roy?
Oh, well, I don't know.
Because he's mad that they're going to spend money.
Okay.
It could.
I guess. And if the problem is, well, we can't do anything to empower her, right, then maybe you just say there are other kooks that we could empower. But that's such a bad game to get involved in that I don't know. Well, now what do we do? Now we've got an empowered Chip Roy. That's no good either.
Who, by the way, endorsed Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, that's true. These are weird people.
They're
this whole
very
party.
Weird people.
And
very,
yeah.
very, very strange people.
And I see DeSantis is out
they're still
raising money,
fighting
too.
with each other about everything. They're still primarying each other.
Yes. And although DeSantis, I guess, now announcing he'll be raising money for the guy he wanted to defeat in the primary, which is a normal thing to do in the general election eventually. But it is interesting how the space of time between being insulted as being a meatball and an idiot in various ways to go on. Yep, I'll be raising money for the guy who said I was a meatball. Just
Which
like
immediately brings to mind that picture, that horrible, cringy picture of Mitt Romney having dinner with Trump. Right.
Ugh. Everybody's gone through it at some level. So I guess it's not a surprise. And certainly, DeSantis has never been a paragon of virtue either. So, all right. And, all right. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. It's time for us to start getting ready to hand it over to Justice, but puts us in mind of what's coming up. This is just, they're dragging it out in the House. And, there's always the danger of Marjorie Taylor Greene pulling another stunt. And maybe if Mike Johnson does enough to annoy people, she might even be right. That'd be an interesting play.
We might have Speaker Jeffries after all.
Yeah, if you want to get a budget passed. Maybe that's the idea, right? At the end, if you don't want the government to shut down, there's one way to do it, and that is just give up and let the Democrats run the place outright, or at least run the Rules Committee. I'll try that one again. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I hope you're continuing on the mend here, and we'll hear from you next week just for another update on exactly what we can expect for the weeks coming up and setting up for the summer when they take off again. All right. Well, thanks again, Joan.
You're most welcome.
And we'll check in with you again next week, see if anything has changed and whether the trial has exploded in any way or any other weird figures show up. Does Victor Orban show up at any point? I guess that's a question. All right.
I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah. Well, I better not then. Hopefully this program is not being translated into Hungarian. Thanks, Joan. We'll see you next week.
Networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
You certainly have. It's time now, of course, to listen to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, who will bring you his collection of stories from around the country and around the world. Of course, an update on TFG trial, but also a Florida man sentenced to 3 years in prison for firebombing a California Planned Parenthood clinic. That's good news. And the bombing, of course, not. We'll just take the conviction.